The question is, what does it mean that his disciples didn't wash their hands before they eat bread? Now, only someone who's been raised in this culture, not a Baptist Jew, but someone who's been raised in this culture knows exactly what that means.
Well, and it's interesting because many Christians, when they talk about this, they'll say, well, here Jesus was nullifying the old law of Moses. And I hear that, I'm like, what are you talking about? Where in the Torah of Moses does it say to wash your hands before you eat bread? That is specifically identified in the oral law as what are called takanot, which are takanot are these reforms that change biblical law. And there's a very clear distinction. I grew up with this distinction. There's mitzvot deoraita, commandments of the Torah, and mitzvot derabanan, commandments of our rabbis. Now, commandments of the Torah in rabbinical speak doesn't necessarily mean it comes from the Torah. It means the rabbis read that from the Torah, whereas the commandments of the rabbis have no basis in the Torah. They're simply things where the rabbis enact a new law. They make these new takanot, these new enactments, and you are bound by those in some ways more than you're bound by the Torah itself. For example, there's a passage in the Tractate of Eruvin in the Talmud that says if you violate a commandment of the Torah, the punishment is lashes. If you violate the takanot of the rabbis, the punishment is death. So in some ways, it's more severe and more intense, your required observance of these man-made laws of the rabbis. So washing the hands, the whole concept of hand impurity, in the Tanakh and the Torah, there's no such things as your hands become ritually unclean. Your whole body can be ritually unclean, and then you go to the mikveh to purify yourself, or you immerse in the river, the Jordan River, to purify yourself. But the concept that just my hands would be unclean and I would have to wash them to make them clean, that's something the Pharisees invented out of the thin blue air.
Pure invention.
Pure invention, and they acknowledge that they invented it. When I was a young man, I asked the question, because we would say the blessing over the washing of the hands. Blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who has commanded us concerning washing the hands. And I asked the question, where are we commanded to wash the hands? And believe me, this wasn't a question other people, everybody asked this question, or they shut up and they asked it, they kept it to themselves, but they certainly thought it. I asked it, and they said, well, we're commanded in the Torah in Deuteronomy 17 to obey the rabbis. And I said, really? Let's look at Deuteronomy 17 together. And in Deuteronomy 17, it talks about when you have a question, you don't know what to do, you go to the high priest at the temple, or you go to the judge who will be in those days, which later becomes the king, and which is ultimately the Messiah. The Messiah is the anointed king. He's the one who has the authority of Deuteronomy 17. The rabbis wrested that authority from God and took it for themselves. And then said, not only do we have the authority to interpret the Bible, we have authority to add commandments to the Bible that you're required to observe even more than what's written.
And that is takanot.
That's takanot. And it's interesting because in the Hebrew, are we getting to the Hebrew yet?
Yeah, well, we can.
We must get to the Hebrew,
okay,
Michael.
Okay.
So in the English here, it says in Matthew 15:3, he answered them, why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? Which it's quite clear that for anybody coming from a rabbinical background, that washing the hands is not just a tradition, it's takanot. It's these man-made laws that the rabbis imposed upon the people.
Right, it's not tradition like we would think of turkey stuffed with dressing on Thanksgiving.
And there is a category of tradition like that in rabbinical Judaism. It's called minhag. And minhag is a different sort of thing, like wearing the kippah, the skull cap. That is a minhag. It's not takanot, although maybe it has become over time. But then there are specific things.
That's a sanctified tradition.
A sanctified tradition, which is binding, but that's not the same as takanot, which is the rabbi sat down in a council one day and said, we need to make a fence around the Torah, so not only do you have to eat clean foods, you can't eat pork, like the Torah says, and you have to only eat clean species, but in addition to that, you have to wash your hands before you eat bread. That's a new commandment that they sat down and created.
And you can eat other things and not wash your hands, but before eating
specifically bread, right?
You have
For
to
example,
wash
before
hands.
you eat fish, you wouldn't be required to wash your hands. It's not a physical cleansing of the hands. In fact, if you take soap and you wash your hands like this and you wash it under the sink, you have not. It's not called netilat yadayim, washing the hands. That was, you have to take the special, jug and over the right and the left and the right and the left and make the blessing, etc. Al netilat yadayim. So I read this and I say, wait a minute, he's saying transgress the commandment of God by their tradition, to me it's obvious he's saying these takanot of the rabbis are a violation of the commandment of God. And to me, this is just so clear. God commanded, Deuteronomy 4:2, Deuteronomy 12:32, don't add and don't take away from the Torah. Adding a commandment to wash your hands is no different than abolishing the Sabbath. It's you adding and taking away is forbidden in the same verses. And from it seems like what he's saying to them is, you've added to the Torah, and that's no different than taking away from the Torah. You violated the commandment of God by your takanot. And the amazing thing is in the Hebrew Matthew, where it says here tradition, it actually says takanot.
Takanot.
That's unbelievable.
Which is legally defined. I mean, Encyclopedia Judaica tells you exactly what it is.
It's a technical term. And actually, this is George Howard's Hebrew Matthew. Let's open this up here. Matthew chapter 15, verse 3. Let me read this. Okay. It says, all right. Let's see. It says,
you need some glasses here?
I'm getting to that age, Michael, where I need the glasses to read. All right, wow. And the scales have fallen from my eyes. It says, Az ba Yeshua hachachamim v'aprushim vayomru elav lama ovrim talmidcha takanot harishonot. Why, you can even hear it, takanot. Why have your disciples violated the ancient takanot? Shehem enam rochatzim yidehem kodem ha'achila, because they don't wash their hands before they eat bread. Vayomer lehem Yeshua. So they're identifying it as takanot in the Hebrew Matthew. That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Vayomer lehem Yeshua velama atem ovrim ma'amarei ha'el ba'ad takanotechem. And Yeshua said to them, and why do you violate the words of God for your takanot? Ma'amarei ha'el, the words of God for your takanot.